The Evil Within 2. This is the game that was a sequel to the hit or miss title known as The Evil Within / Psycho Break. The name differed depending on which country you were in for some reason, similar to how Resident Evil is called Biohazard in some countries. Anyway, the original Evil Within game was an, like I said, extremely hit or miss title that had a lot of mixed reception when it came out. However, it has gathered a decent following after its launch back in 2014. Ironically enough, the original was directed by Shinji Mikami, the person who directed Resident Evil 4. You know, the game that everyone loves? What happened, Shinji Mikami? How did you fuck this up? So what happened? Why do so many people dislike The Evil Within, but love Resident Evil 4? These questions will not be answered in this video, because I'm focusing on the sequel that almost everyone liked, but barely anyone played. Unfortunately, it seemed like the original Evil Within game left such a terrible taste in people's mouths that they refused to give the sequel a chance at all. I'm pretty sure the second game didn't even sell a quarter of the amount of the original sold, which is really unfortunate. The reason why this is unfortunate is because The Evil Within 2 is one of the best survival horror games to come out in this generation. As you can see from the Steam reviews, a very reliable source. The game is 91% positive overall, which is saying something because Steam reviews can be extremely unfair when it comes to some games. Now it's time for me to go into why I like this game so much. The Evil Within 2 starts off with the main character Sebastian being really depressed and drunk because of all the shit he had to endure in the previous game, which is brought up a bit later in the game when Sebastian starts having visions of therapists not believing him about anything that happened in the previous game. However, that isn't the main reason why he is depressed and drinking his misery away. It's because his daughter died in a house fire years before the start of the first game. Which is confusing because he never seemed to dwell on it in the first game. In fact, Sebastian didn't dwell on any of his issues in life in the first game, as journal entries did most of the talking for him. I don't think he was human in the first game. He never showed actual emotions. He also had a very weird walking animation. Holy shit. Julie Kidman, another character from the previous game, tells Sebastian that his daughter is still alive and is being used for the simulation thing known as STEM, which is also from the first game. STEM is also being run by a big bad organization known as Mobius, who Kidman is working for. I would like to point out that Sebastian has a lot more personality in this game compared to the first.
Lily is alive, and she's with us, but she's in danger. We need you to help save her.
Save her? What have you done to her? Get your hands off me!
It's still strange seeing him express actual emotions instead of standing awkwardly and saying,
What the fuck?
This leads nicely onto why this game is superior to the first one. The story. See, what I explained to you just then is an easy jumping off point to get involved and interested in the story, as it's easy to understand. While in the first game, you start off in a hospital and end up getting chased by some fellow with a chainsaw. What is going on in this game? The story in the first game was so convoluted and complex that it had to be explained even more in DLC, whilst the second game is just straight to the point and easy to follow. Once Sebastian has been sent into STEM for the second time, he goes through some eerie mansion area. This area is where the player is introduced to a feature in certain horror games known as mindfuckery. The player is also first introduced to one of the main villains of the game. Stefano Valentini is his name, and it is clearly shown to the player that he is one mean motherfucker. It's also shown to the player that he's the one that has been creating those repeating dead bodies with his camera, as it shows the player how he murders this poor innocent man. Just a heads up, if you get spotted by him, he slits your throat almost straight away. Can I mention how the mansion in Chapter 2 really sets the tone for the game? Some things happen in this area that creep me out on my first playthrough. In fact, some of these actually got me and creeped me out whilst recording the footage.
Hello?
What is an Evil Within game without disgusting abominations? You meet your first monstrosity in the first 30 minutes of the game.
What the hell? What the fuck?
It's basically supposed to be an amalgamation of multiple bodies on one entity with a huge buzzsaw. Unfortunately, this subject leads on to my main gripe with the Evil Within 2. I prefer the monsters in the first Evil Within game. I just prefer the Japanese horror inspired feel of the bosses in the first Evil Within game. They feel more creative and honestly a lot more terrifying compared to the more western feel of the second game. Like in the first game, you had a grudge spider hybrid that would chase after you down linear corridors. Let's not forget that brutal death animation. They clearly didn't forget about the older bosses from the first game though. They knew they were really memorable, so they did something with them in the second game, which I'm not going to spoil, you're going to have to play it yourself. The second game actually has more interesting smaller enemies compared to the first game, as they actually feel like a threat and don't just walk towards you. No, they fucking run at you, they don't hold back at all, whilst in the first game they just awkwardly walk towards you. The first game just had more threatening designs overall. However, the first game had clumsy controls and just felt awkward. And the stealth felt like an afterthought that was thrown in last minute. Whilst in the second game they improved almost everything about the original gameplay wise. They added this cover mechanic for stealth which allows you to hide behind objects and peek around walls and such. You know, so you can hide and look at the enemies instead of awkwardly crouching towards a wall. Sebastian also doesn't have the stamina similar to a quote-unquote healthy American anymore. Thank God. That was one of the main gripes everyone had about the first game. Speaking of gameplay changes, the second game is a lot less linear than the first game. After you finish the tutorial-esque chapter, you get thrown into this somewhat large town. Before you can fully explore, you have to do the segment where you're introduced to your first safe house, which is where you meet the biggest asshole known as Chris O'Neill.
Stop, or I'll shoot! No!
I'm O'Neill.
Chris
O'Neill.
ONING gives you some signals to track on a radio thing that you find near the start of the game. Each signal is color coded. The orange signal represents the story missions which progress the story. The green signal represents side quests, which I highly recommend doing, because you could literally miss out on getting game-changing weapons by not doing some of these. Doing certain side quests can change certain things that happen in your playthrough. For example, you can do this side quest which takes you to this house. The house seems normal at first until a dark figure is at the end of the corridor. The dark figure is a ghost that is supposed to represent Sebastian's past in the previous version of STEM, as it usually warps him and hunts him down in older areas from the first game. The way this thing moves always makes me shit myself though. There are more side quests relating to this ghost lady later in the game, but you'll have to find out for yourself as I don't want to spoil how interesting they are. There are random spirits of people with recorded voice lines scattered around each area which are supposed to represent Mobius soldiers or citizens from Union. I forgot to mention the simulation isn't called STEM anymore. It's called Union. I'm guessing Mobius wanted to cover up the mistakes of STEM by renaming it or something? Either way, finding these voice recordings grants the player brain juice, which is also known as green gel by normal people. The green gel can be used to upgrade Sebastian's stats in like a brain surgery chair that can be found in Sebastian's safe room. I forgot to mention that there are mirrors scattered around safe houses that allow Sebastian to warp to his safe room. Oh yeah, did I mention you can play the game entirely in first person mode? Because you can. The Evil Within 2 isn't exactly a refined masterpiece though, don't get me wrong. I don't think any game is. But I don't want to spoil any of the game for you viewers, as I highly recommend that you pick this game up and give it a shot. There's a lot to this game that can only be truly enjoyed in a first-hand experience, which is why I'm going to leave the rest for you guys to discover. It was overshadowed by the mixed reception of its previous game, but it improves almost everything wrong with that game. I would honestly put this up there with Resident Evil 4 as one of the best survival horror games, but that's just my opinion. Take it with a massive grain of salt, because I thought Resident Evil 6 was an actual fun game. Good night, everybody!